Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk to you today about the Stauffer family from the perspective of an adoptive mom and someone who has been working in the area of autism and dyslexia and ADHD for over 15 years. And I just thought it would be kind of a good idea to not give my opinion. There's a lot of opinions and comments going on right now. I don't think you need another one. But I do think this is an amazing opportunity for us to learn from this situation. And so I want to give you 3 really good pointers at the end of this video to talk to you about what you can learn, what you can change. Instead of, we don't want to just be enraged and write comments and then do nothing about it. Because Huxley's not the only child who is autistic who's been abandoned. Our systems, our education systems, our foster care systems, our current, kind of predominant parenting skills abandon children with special needs all the time. We have a society that very consistently abandons autistic people. And I want to talk a bit about that because the physical abandonment that we've seen, we're able to get outraged about and we're able to talk about because we saw it. We saw it happen. But there's emotional abandonment and psychological abandonment that's happening to little boys and girls like Huxley all over the world every single day. And that's the kind of thing that we can learn from and hopefully change. So just a little bit about the adoption process and the lingo, because I know a lot of people are getting really bothered by the term rehome. So it's typically called a disruption. It does happen fairly often. The child will be placed into your home after there's been some contact over weekends, and sometimes it's a very long process, especially if the child has difficulties with transitioning, or they've had a disruption before and they're not ready to trust that it's going to happen for them this time. So there's a lengthy process. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's not. It's really case dependent. And so you have about 6 months, 6 months after the child is placed into your home before you're allowed to legally adopt that child. So you can take longer. You do not have to legally adopt after 6 months, but that's the standard. They must allow for 6 months. And that's really to make sure that the family they have chosen to place that child with is actually the best fit for that child. And, as we can see in cases like this, is this little boy in a better home now? Yes, I would say yes, because there is a family that has taken him in and understands who he is not going to try to fit him into a little box, and is just going to allow him to be him. And that's a wonderful thing. So typically disruptions do not happen after, 3 years of adopting a child legally, especially when they're that young and you've seen the progression of difficulties or behaviors. Also there are a lot of resources that are available to these people and to other adoptive parents who do have an assessment of autism. So, I know there was some talk about specialists saying that they should rehome this child, that they should, give this child to another family. That's not a recommendation that any specialist would make. They would probably recommend different therapies, music therapy. Some families choose ABA therapy. We all have different opinions on all of these things, but these would be the recommendations by a specialist. There's other resources that are available. So we want to make sure that we know that that's not a truth. And when one adoptive parent says something, it kind of can sometimes get out of hand, and people believe it of all adoptive parents or the process for all adopted children, and it's not. The second thing is in that 6-month period, and within usually the first few weeks, maybe the first few months, again, dependent on the child, there is what we call the honeymoon stage. And basically that child is trying so hard to be everything they think you want them to be. And so all of the behaviors, all of the trauma that they've experienced and the behaviors that stem from that trauma are hidden. And it's just like everything's wonderful, and the parents are usually kind of overcompensating for all of the difficulties these children have been through. So there might be more gifts or, whatever it is. There is a honeymoon stage, and that's what it's called. And after that, and they talk to you about this during the training, after that, you're going to start to see some of the real behaviors, some of the real communication. Okay. And so this is where I really want to go with kind of the 3 things that we can learn. So behavior is communication. If you have a child who is nonverbal, you probably already know this, but if you don't have a child who is nonverbal, you may see different behaviors that you think, oh that child is so spoiled, or they're having a little temper tantrum. They're not. They're actually communicating an inner need. And if you are in tune with how to communicate with them, how to listen to behavior instead of always expecting them to speak, because that's your preferred method of communication, then you are able to better meet their needs. And those behaviors slowly but eventually decrease. So we really want to talk about that. Behavior is communication. So I know that there were some videos that were taken, some recordings of some meltdowns that this child had had. And this is when a child is having a meltdown. It is not a temper tantrum. It is not something that they're doing out of, being spoiled and just wanting what they want right now. They are experiencing a complete overwhelm of sensory overload that they're not able to process properly in that moment. And usually there's an overwhelm of emotion on top of the sensory stuff that's coming in. And so because all of this stuff is coming in and they're so sensitive to it, the meltdown happens. And this is something that's really good to know the next time you see a child who is having a meltdown. The next time, you're in the shopping mall or whatever store, and you see that behavior happening, and you see that the parent is letting it happen. Very often this is something that does need to happen and allowed to happen, because there's a point where we can intervene, but we have to let the processing begin for them first. So putting YouTube videos up of this child when he's in a very private and difficult moment, it's very similar to recording someone who's having a panic attack or a mental breakdown, and putting it up on YouTube without their consent. We wouldn't do that, not only because it's really cruel, but because we would get sued. So just something to think about for next time. The second thing is there was a decision made by this family to tape the little boy's fingers because there was some stimming behavior. So stimming is when a person, maybe, they might twitch their fingers like this. They might do the hand flapping. It's a behavior that does not hurt themselves or anyone around them. It's very similar to you tapping your pencil when you're waiting for something or when you're nervous. Maybe you shake your leg under the table during a meeting when you've been sitting too long because you can't really sit still. Maybe you walk back and forth when you're talking on the phone because it helps you to kind of process the information. These are all forms of stimming. But what we're saying when we take their fingers or we make sure that they don't do that particular behavior anymore is that that behavior, although not harmful to anyone, including yourself, is uncomfortable for me to watch. And my comforts are more important than yours. So, something again to learn about, right? If the behavior is not hurting anyone, is not changing, or creating any difficult situation for this child, let them do it. This is a process that their body feels it needs to happen because it calms them. It allows them to process sensory information and emotion and things that would otherwise result in a meltdown. So, again, just another thing to kind of note about this situation. And the last thing is there was a very kind of consistent theme, and there is often a consistent theme, that autistic children need to come into our world. They need to meet our needs. They need to communicate the way we communicate and we prefer to communicate. They need to show us attention in the way that we want to be shown attention because we're used to that way. They need to perceive the world from our viewpoint because it's easier for us because then we don't have to change. And although we want to see all of these changes in the world, especially for our children, sometimes we forget that that has to start with us. We have to go into their world. And I don't care if you're a parent or a teacher or an EA or a medical professional, or you're just someone who, maybe the kid next door, he's autistic. Maybe this would be a great opportunity for you to try to see the world from his point of view, to try to understand why he might need to behave in the way that he does, instead of constantly assuming that he must adjust to our comforts. So there's a lot of opinions, I know, and a lot of outrage, and I think that's great. I do, because I think it's creating an awareness of how outraged we should be, and not just by this couple, but by the way children with divergent thinking have been treated for decades, if not centuries, in our education system, in our parenting, in our society as a whole, and as they grow up in our workplaces. So I hope this was helpful. If it was, I'd love for you to comment below and let me know what was helpful or what you'd like to hear more about. And thanks so much for your time.